The topic today is remodels and additions. And let me minimize this. There we go. And so as usual, I'm taking an actual project of ours and sort of taking it apart to show at least our approach to how to maximize Vectorworks's tools to make these kinds of projects workable. So a quick tour. I picked one that's a small project so that it can be sort of tractable for an hour long so discussion, but it's got a bit of complexity to it. As you can see, it's got funky roofs and flat decks and a pool and some topography and so on. So this is not quite what was built. Unfortunately, there were some subsequent changes for cost purposes, but it's a good starting point. This is a one-story house where the attic was finished out, and we ended up doing a substantial amount of demolition. And as you can see from the back of the house, a bit of an addition here to the back and to the side. This is sort of what we demoed that's kind of non-textured. So you can see some holes there in the roof for future skylights, this little gable end, and sort of everything in red here is what's been demoed. And then, oops, sorry, jumped the gun there. And so if we, this is another view that shows just the parts that were added. So everything that's existing that remains is grayed out. So there's a substantial amount of addition in addition to, on top of the remodeling. And then I think what makes a little project like this particularly complex for the addition is that it's not simply, one half of the house stays where it is and then we just add everything like a wing. There's a lot of adding and subtracting, sort of snaking its way throughout the entire project, which makes it challenging to document that. And so I think this methodology, or these methodologies, are hopefully particularly useful. So there isn't per se a phasing schema or tool set in Vectorworks that allows you to assign a phase to different components of your file. So what I'm suggesting is that we use a variety of different techniques together to achieve that. And really, I'll start with the organization palette. And so let's look at that. And when it comes to additions and remodels, it's the layers and that really do the heavy lifting, layers and classes. And I'm showing you a screenshot of my org palette here as a reminder to me to talk about stories and layers. So if we look at there's 2 stories on this project. It's got a floor-to-floor height of 9'6". And if we look at story 1 and edit that as a way of looking at it, you can see that we've got a bottom of structure for the roof. We have a ceiling that is layerless, just a layerless level. There's a base layerless level for the baseboard component of walls. We've got a 1x3 baseboard. There's a finished floor level, which has a layer associated with it called floor 1. And then there's this layer or level type, called existing. So that doesn't pardon the repetition, doesn't exist as a standard level type. And I think not long ago, we talked about stories and we talked about creating your own level type. And that's exactly what I did here is I've created a new level type called existing. And that's where all the existing geometry, goes. So you can only have each story can only have one instance of any level type. So I can't have two finished floors within the same story. And so to sort of work with that design of the story tool, I just create a new level type called existing for existing stuff, right? So that's what's going on there. And then if we look at the design layers and how that sort of plays out with the design layers, you can see that I've got a floor one layer and I've got a floor existing one layer. And sure enough, they're both assigned to the story one story. And one is a finished floor type and one is an existing type. And that's kind of the big idea, I guess, if it is a big idea. And then with respect to classes, there's a couple of different schools of thought about how to do your classes. And my school of thought is to keep things simple, or at least as simple as I can. So if I show you my classes here, you'll see that I have in this file, we have two demolition classes, demolition dash main. And that has a heavier line weight. It's a 0.30 and a dashed line associated with it with no fill. And then I have a demolition other, and that's for everything else. And I'll get more into that. But again, there's no fill. Graphic attributes are used at creation, and it's a slightly lighter line weight. So the way that plays out is in this floor plan, I'm on the design layer. We're in the floor existing one. So the only thing that I draw in this design layer are things that are existing: walls, foundation, you name it. And you can see, if we zoom in a little bit, you might not be able to quite see it, but if you zoom in a little bit, you can see that walls that are existing and remain are solid and have this poche, and then walls that get demoed are dashed, right? Just as you'd expect. And then everything else is dashed with this slightly lighter line weight. If I just go to black and white mode, you can see that there's a lighter line weight for everything not walls, and everything walls gets the heavier line weight. And that's pretty much it. Now, there is an alternative way of approaching this, which is to create a demolition class for every type of object that's demoed. So you could have a plumbing demo class, an electrical demo class, a millwork demo class, a door demo class, a window demo class, and so on and so forth. And that would be, that's totally fine. You've got to make sure to class everything properly. My feeling about that is that, at least in the way we're currently practicing, when something's demoed, it's gone. We've got a spec that demolished objects be salvaged if possible, or reused, or donated, or all of that. But I'm not typically going to show, say, a demo RCP that shows just lighting and hides everything else. I'm not typically going to do a demo plumbing plan, right? So it's fine with me to just show everything that's demolished in the same line weight, with the exception of walls, just because those are pretty significant, and they tend to get a different graphic attribute. So that's the general idea, that everything that is existing gets applied to this, lives on this existing level. If it remains, then it's classed just like anything else: wall class, door class, window class, plumbing class, and so forth. If it gets demoed, then it's applied. It's assigned to one of two demolition classes. And then here you can see that the new construction is ghosted in on a grade layer. And so if I sort of flip the active layer to, say, the floor layer, you can see everything that's new is over here. And I can turn things off to make this a little bit clearer. And everything that's existing is on the other layer and is classed appropriately. So the idea is that I can have a viewport that only shows me my proposed configuration. So that shows both the existing and the new layer. And then I could have another viewport that only shows demoed conditions. It doesn't show the proposed construction layer. It just shows the existing, and it has the demolition classes turned on. Whereas, of course, in the proposed plan, we turn the demolition classes off. So that's really the explanation in a nutshell. And then there's a couple of more things that I want to show you that I think kind of work well with this idea, but I just wanted to pause for a second in case anyone wanted to unmute and ask a question. I think this is fairly straightforward.
It's Bill Vanderstill. I have a question.
Hey, Bill.
Doing the existing and the demolition, what I've done, I think, is pretty much what you've done. But I have a problem in that. Let's say I want to always have a situation where I always have the opportunity to show the existing house as it was, and then I overlay that with another layer of the demo, and that I have to make that opaque so that it blocks out the walls that were solid underneath it in the other layer. But I don't know if that's the right way to do that, because when I want to show the demo plan, I want to show the walls remaining that were part of the existing house, and then the walls are being demoed. But I started by just making different wall types with the ones I knew were going to be removed, and then selecting all those and changing them to the demo class. But then I didn't have the existing walls anymore, so that was my problem.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes it is. I've had builders, particularly again in a residential context, I've had builders request to see existing conditions. I mean, usually they can kind of figure it out just by looking at the demo class, right? But if they want to see it, the way that I would approach your conundrum is, the first thing that we do on a project like this, of course, is we generate an as-built file. And that's obviously the basis for our design work. And so if you needed to show the existing conditions, what I would recommend that you do is that you create an as-built layer in your file that is not part of your story schema. It's sort of off on its own. Okay. And that you go ahead and viewport in your as-built file.
You poured into it. I missed that one.
Yeah. So first, let me say that once we create an as-built file, we don't touch it. It sort of gets sequestered, and other than to correct something that we missed or we need to tweak it, we don't touch it. Yeah, and so we don't do any design work in the as-built file.
That's why you poured it in. Get it? Okay.
And so what you could do if you needed to show as-built conditions is just have a design layer create a viewport with an external reference to your as-built file. Show the floor plan on your sheet layer as an, so you could have on your demolition sheet, for example, you could have existing and demo.
Right.
Now that's assuming that you create a separate as-built file and that you don't, you keep it pristine, which is what we do. And I highly recommend that you do that because as you're designing, you're like cutting walls and putting openings in them and demoing walls, and then you kind of get to the point where you might want to see, okay, now where did I start? You might need to backtrack, maybe copy and paste in place something that you wish you hadn't demoed or mangled. And it might be easier to just to go back to that as-built file and sort of resuscitate something there. So for that reason, we keep the pristine as-built file, and it could also help you in your situation.
I just never considered the viewport concept, and that makes complete sense because that's the one you're going to be messing around with. And that way it always leads the other file. I was always just doing it on layers, and it became complicated in terms of visibility. But in the viewport, that's a different story. So
Yeah, ultimately the viewport goes to a layer, right? But that layer isn't populating your elevations or your sections, right? It's just its
right.
own. It's just like a plan diagram.
I'll have to try that
Yeah,
one. Thank you.
yeah. No, good question. Anyone else? All right, we'll jump in if there's something that you see. So again, I've got this plan and it's just existing conditions, and then everything is in its own class as I normally would be, or in one of the two demolition classes. Now, there are times when you might want to create an opening in a wall, for example. And here's a condition where in the completed project, we're going to have this sliding door here, but currently there's just a wall. And so one way to address that would be to simply draw a line where the opening begins and ends, and you could use the line to cut the wall into shortened segments and then insert your door into the wall. But then you've got to deal with what's above it, and that's going to be kind of messy. So what I've been doing lately is creating a door and window style. So if you click on this door, or if I click on that door, you can see that it's in its own style. And if I edit the style, what it is it's a door, and it's a door opening in an existing wall. And so most of its parameters are locked. So it's always going to be an opening. The width and the height, of course, are variable, but I can't make a door out of it. I can't make a pocket door. I can't make a slider. It's just an opening. And so the intention is, and it's always going to be in my demolition class. By definition, the style definition, it's always going to be in the demolition class. So I can just grab this door style, or if I'm creating an opening for a future window, I could grab the window style and then just drop it in the wall and then change the height and the width. And that's all there is to it. It is, if you look at the data, everything's locked. I can't assign data to it. I can't, it can't be put on the door schedule. I don't want to schedule this. It's just an opening. So all of that is locked to be basically nil. And so it's a very, very simple object. if I go to the resource manager and show it to you there, it's doors and windows. So here it is, door opening an existing wall. And the way you assign a class to it is not by editing the style. Normally you would think that you would just edit that style. But that actually, that's not how you do it. What you do is you go from the resource manager, you right click on the icon and go to plugin object style options. And one of the plugin style options is that you can assign it to a class. And so I always put it in the demolition other class. I should probably actually lock this down so that a user can't change it. And so whenever it gets inserted, it's automatically going to be assigned to the correct class. And then there's a window object that's the same deal, or window style. And so then when I want to replace or place rather an object in that opening, then I just have this, I just have this door and it's just placed there within that opening. It's not actually inserted into the wall. And it's not inserted in the wall because the wall is on my existing layer and the door is on the new layer or the proposed layer. And so if I inserted it in the wall, then the wall and anything inserted in it has to be in the same layer. I think that's fairly evident. So this way, the door is just placed there. It can still be scheduled. It's the correct size and so on and so forth. And if I need to change the door, say from a 6-foot door to an 8-foot door, right? Then I'll need to go back to the demo door and change it to 8 feet as well, so that the opening is the right size for the door. But so it's a two-step process in that sense. But it's a lot cleaner than creating a length of wall just for that door on the new layer. Then speaking of styles, and another thing that I do, and Bill, maybe this is what you were alluding to as well, is I have wall styles for existing walls that generally have a lighter poche. And then I have wall styles for new walls that have a darker poche for the main component. And then I have a wall style for my demolition walls. And generally speaking, when I show those, I remove any kind of sheathing or chipboard or base, or I don't have any of those components. I just have a single component, the structural component of the wall. It gets forced to be in my demolition main class or whatever demolition class you want it to be in. And so if I need to demo an existing wall, I would just click on that wall segment and replace the style with my demo wall, just like I'm showing you here, and just line up the wood stud framing to the wood stud framing. Make sure to change classes and textures, but don't change the heights, and hit OK. And I've just demoed that wall. It puts it in the correct class, and everything is sort of semi automated. And so having a dedicated demolition class for my walls just makes that a little bit simpler. Of course, it assumes that all of your walls are 2x4. They may not be. You may need to change that component thickness, or turn it to an unstyled wall and change its depth or thickness and so forth. But this way, you don't have to go through the trouble of like taking your wall, deleting components, changing the class. All of that just happens in one fell swoop simply by changing the wall style and lining up those components.
So first of all, when I do this, I have pretty much like what you do, except I make a distinction between walls and partitions, and that walls are those which support ceiling joists, and partitions run parallel with ceiling joists. And the distinction is so they can see immediately, like, uh-oh, we remove a wall, we have to deal with it supporting the ceiling. And so just removing a partition, nobody cares.
Right. Yeah.
So the contractors have found that helpful.
That's a great tip. Thanks, Bill. Or you could also show, have a demo style for exterior walls and interior walls, which is kind of the same idea, though obviously some interior walls can be load bearing. Yeah, and presumably, Bill, you've got some sort of graphic style that designates those demoed walls as load bearing, so they've got some sort of a hatch.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, yep, that's a great idea. I might steal that one, actually. Then I guess the last thing to say about demos in addition is that it's helpful sometimes to visualize those. So if I go to my demolition plan here, right? So here's we're sort of zoomed in on this viewport. You can see it's pretty obvious what's going on. Windows and doors and whatnot are being shown dashed with a lighter line weight. Walls are shown heavier, but also dashed that are being demolished. But you may want to do something like what Bill's describing, for example. So here, I don't really have very interesting sort of attributes for my demolition objects. They're just shown solid. And I could, of course, take those classes, the demolition classes, and just gray them out, but then they can be a little hard to read. So another thing to consider in order to augment your documentation or make your demolition documentation a little more clear is to use data visualization. So there's a little pull-down menu up here in your view bar for data visualization. If you don't have that, you can show the little disclosure widget and make sure that data visualization is checked, either the long or the short version. And it's like these little glasses with a green lens and a red lens. And so if you're not familiar with data visualization, you can create a new one, you can manage an existing one. I've already got one set up, so I'll just activate this one. And so I'll click that. And so whatever sort of rules I have set up for data visualization, it immediately changes the appearance of my design layer temporarily or a viewport. So, as I'm going around, anything that's demoed has this sort of red translucent texture to it. And that's all thanks to the data visualization. So the way that works, if we just edit that data visualization, I've called it demolition. That's fairly straightforward. And I'm going to define the criteria. And so the criteria are any criteria in this set. So I can choose all or any, and this would be any. In other words, either of these conditions is met, then the objects will be visualized in that particular way. And so if the class is in the demolition main, or if the class is in the demolition other, it's going to be highlighted in this data visualization. And anything within groups or symbols or plugins is counted. And you can see I've demolished about 2,200 objects. And then I can specify what that looks like. So I can either hit auto color and just let Vectorworks colorize things the way I want, or I can change my color settings and uh, edit those. And so I've given that a solid fill with a kind of salmon color. I've applied a texture to it, which is just a simple translucent texture. And then for the pen, it gets a solid red line. And that's that. Now, if objects don't have a fill, then they won't show a fill. And that's what's happening over here with these objects over here, is that they have no fill, and so they're just showing up with the red line. And something I realized that I sort of didn't talk about. So here you're seeing everything with sort of the data visualization. So Bill, you could have a data visualization for load bearing versus non-load bearing, and there are any number of ways that you could track that, either as a tag on an object or a class or a component name, whatnot, a material. And then the other thing that I want to mention is, when you're demoing fixtures, you may start out with, let's turn off that data visualization. Right. So when you're demoing a fixture, you may start out with a symbol, but then because I don't really need to see a 3D model of something that's being removed, I just ungroup that symbol in a 2D view and then simplify it, right? So this vanity might have started with a faucet and a drain and so on and so forth, and I just drew it in a very simple way so that it's quite clear. Likewise, the range here, this sink, everything is just kind of simplified because I don't really need to worry about showing an awful lot of detail on these components or on these demolished objects. And so, in the end, for the proposed, everything that's demoed is the demolition classes are turned off, so I don't see those. Likewise, upstairs. And then the CDs, look something like this. And sometimes if the demolition isn't particularly straightforward, we might include some perspective views of what's being demolished right here on the on the demolition plan.
Unknown caller.
I'm sorry? Was someone asking a question?
My phone is ringing. I apologize.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right. Thanks, Bill. Sorry. I mean, that's pretty much it. I don't know if there's more questions or others have suggestions on some ways to improve documentation or dealing with additions and remodels, but please share.
Well, I find that what you talked about in terms of partitions and moving walls and removing walls and putting a door, creating an opening. I've never done that before. That solves a big problem. Create the opening first and then put the new door in it. A silly question, but I'm thinking if I was to do that, I would make the hole the size of the rough opening for the door that I'm putting in there, because that door is not going to be connected to the new door, will not be connected to the wall like they usually are. It's not an insert in the wall, right?
Right.
It's a placement.
Yeah, and if you were to do that, then right, I guess it depends on how literal you want your drawings to be. So for example, let's go to that let's go to that door, which I think got moved, right? So my dimensions is in the wrong place. Right. So I might go ahead and add a little dimension string, right, to show that opening. And obviously, if that's a load-bearing wall, which it likely isn't because it's on the gable end, but if that's a load-bearing wall, then I probably need more than just the rough opening, the 6'2" or whatever. I probably need another 6 inches at least for a couple of studs on either side. And at that point, what I may be doing is actually making that opening considerably larger, drawing a wall in there that is the width of the unit plus the rough opening plus whatever structure that I need to support the new header, and also account for the header height above, right? So that's certainly not a bad thing, but oftentimes I'm trusting the door schedule to and the framer who's hopefully knowledgeable to know that all of that needs to happen. And that might be a misplaced trust, I don't know. But so it just depends on how literal you want your drawings to be. Certainly doesn't hurt. But then if you're going to show that rough opening gap, then you need something to fill it in the model so that you don't have this little piece of daylight.
Well, it would usually come out with a trim. It is daylight, but it doesn't really matter because it's just the trim covers up the gap on the sides, and I mean it's kind of floating between the shims anyway. So whatever, it doesn't really matter. But
Yeah.
The other thing
Yeah,
about the floor, different horizontal surfaces, like if you're putting in a new floor, either that's thicker or thinner or not level, or even level with. Sometimes you're ripping out a tile floor and putting in a wood floor, vice versa. So it's the same deal of the demolition classes and the adding components of the demolition class, which have to do with floors and horizontal structures that might, or ceilings that might be removed.
Yep, that's right. So we typically model our ceilings either as floors or as roof faces, depending on whether they're vaulted or flat. And those get assigned to a demolition class as well. And the flooring issue is an interesting one, and it's probably one that, depending again on the level of precision that you want your drawings to communicate, you might actually take that up in your stories, right? So you might have a finished floor that's say 5/8 or 1.5 inches or whatever is appropriate above the foundation, the top of foundation or top of subfloor. And so in that case, you're in the case of this project, we had a slab. Your slab might be on a separate foundation layer that is linked to that ground floor story, and it might be an appropriate dimension below the finished floor elevation, so the finished floor can be new and go in as a separate object from the slab itself, if that makes sense.
Yep.
There's a trade-off, right? I mean, demolition it's kind of a rough business, and so being really fussy about it. I sometimes wonder if we're just being too precise with some of our demolition, because in the field that's not what it looks like. It's not surgery.
Well, I think
generally.
you're just basically giving suggestions of giving them the knowledge of what ultimately needs to be done. What they end up having to do is, like you said about the door, I wouldn't go so far as to account for the new structural framing, because I figured that either in standard details or standard practice they would know what to do. But what they do need to know ultimately is the rough opening. So to me, that was the magic number. Although even then, that becomes problematic because let's just suddenly say that, oh, we went from Marvin to Anderson doors and there's a slightly
Yep.
different size. So that becomes a problem.
Yep. I used to be really religious about showing rough openings in door and window schedules, and then for that very reason that there were sometimes manufacturer changes.
Yep.
I found that a spec or a note that requires that they coordinate the rough opening with the manufactured requirements is maybe not as helpful, but probably more truthful.
Well, it's helpful that they don't make mistakes.
All right. Anyone else have questions or comments or suggestions?
So how come Vectorworks? I mean, what we're doing is, I think I've done some, research about this, and what you've described, other than the viewport concept, is things that I've come across or came up with myself. But it always seems somehow that why isn't this somehow more automatically incorporated as an option in Vectorworks? That there's a pathway within Vectorworks to do this, or is this?
Yeah, I think what you're describing is what's commonly called phasing, right? And I mean, this is in some ways kind of a complicated project because there's just a lot of geometry going on. But compared to some sort of institutional project where you might have multiple phases of construction, not just demolition and new construction. Something like phasing would be even more desirable.
Right.
And since I don't know sort of what the game plan is, I'm pretty sure if you check the Vectorworks roadmap, I would have to hazard a guess that phasing is somewhere on there. But I haven't looked at it recently, so I couldn't speak authoritatively to that. But
I could chime in if
yeah,
you like.
yeah, Keith, since you're here.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Keith. I used to live in Austin. I went to school at UT and have worked for Francois in the past. So and now I'm a Vectorworks trainer, and I can say that notion of phasing is interesting. I don't know that there's something in the works to incorporate that as an actual feature, but there is a way that's more recent to addressing that, and that's using record formats. And so similar to the way you're organizing content with classes, you can also attach records to these objects. And in your record format, you might have a drop down or a pick list and have existing to remain, existing to be demoed or just demo, and new construction. What's nice about that is you, again, for the sake of simplicity, you don't overburden yourself with extraneous class and subsets. And also, in this case, you'd utilize data visualization, but set your criteria for records, objects using record, and it could be construction phasing record. You can utilize data manager to help facilitate that with existing, if you're wanting to transition in that methodology, it's an existing document. Data manager is probably something you want to learn more about. But I still see the forgive me for saying limitations, because Vectorworks is a software that we design without limits. But there are some certain situations that you still are required to have an object, a building shell element, let's say for a wall, that needs to be replicated for existing or for a demo or for a new. So it actually can't phase like in a quantum sense of, which would be really nice if it could, if the wall could know that it can have different phases of one wall element. The way we have to do today is we still need to create 3 different walls that can coexist in the same place, but either that's still going to be managed by a data visualization, class visibility, or a layer visibility. You follow that, Francois? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I like your suggestion of the record format because then it means I don't need my demolition classes anymore, possibly, or I could rely on them less. I could simply use,
you would have one catch-all demo class, and that's it.
yeah, and I wouldn't care about the graphic attributes because I could manipulate those with data visualization all day long, and that would, that would take care of my graphical needs. I mean, to go back to this notion of kind of how precise or how granular your demolition model is. If you look at these, if you look at my model here that I first opened with, you can't really tell from looking at these walls which of these walls is new and which of these walls is existing, right? They've all been sort of reskinned with fresh stucco. And let me just turn off my trees because it makes it easier to grab things. So if I turn on my let's see, it's kind of little. Hang on a second. Sometimes the visibility tool needs a moment to let go.
Well, while we're waiting, I have a silly question that I've always had a problem with, and it's very minor details, but if you're removing any wall inside, and that's all you're doing, but generally what happens is where it intersected or teed into another wall, that needs to be patched, the floor needs to be patched, and the ceiling needs to be patched. And I always thought, well, it'd be nice that when you remove that wall, that you look at 3D model or elevation, that there's a double line in the wall that shows, oh, this is gone, it needs to be dealt with. But I've never been able to successfully figure that
out. Yeah, I've always just dealt with that with a note.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
All right, so I don't know if you can see, but if I just click on here, right, this is the old roof line of that little shed addition, and then there's just a piece of wall that's sort of stuck up here. So that's a new wall, but this is an existing wall, and you can't really tell, right? In other words, I didn't when I've got this new wall, I didn't or this existing wall, I didn't have a component for the old siding and then demo that component and then add a new component of stucco. I just show that wall in its final sort of form with a weather barrier and stucco and so forth. So within a specific wall, because as Keith said, you don't have phases of walls. I couldn't say phase out the old siding and phase in new stucco within the wall. Either the whole wall stays or the whole wall goes, is what I'm saying. Now, I could certainly assign a demo class to a certain component of that wall, right? I could put siding and then assign that siding to some sort of a demolition class, but I couldn't occupy the same space with new stucco because wall components can't overlap. They're distinct. And so in this case, I've just made the compromise or the decision, if you will, to just show my old walls, which are going to get restuccoed with the new stucco anyway, and just live with that because on my demolition plan, I'm not showing all of the components that get demoed. I'm just showing the structural component, the frame component of the wall itself. Now the exception is this house had a little brick veneer in front, and so if I look at that wall style, you can see that indeed I've got this masonry component, and I've assigned that to the demolition main class. But then what I did is where the air gap would go is I just added a stucco component. So if we look back at the front of the house of the model, and the zoom controls are always in my way, right? And if I now say turn on my demolition classes, right, you can see there's actually a brick component here. It's not rendered as brick because it's in the demo class, which has no texture, but there's this brick component that's in the demo class that in fact is the new gutter, the new downspout is within that brick thickness. So there's the brick in the demo class. And if I turn that off, right, it reveals the new stucco that's already beneath it. I don't know if that explanation makes a lot of sense, but that's kind of
just and then in terms of your project, when you showed the brick, it was floating. Wouldn't the slab have come out an extra 4 inches to hold the brick? And did you cut it back or?
yeah. No, I just didn't bother modeling the brick lug there.
Because there probably will be. I mean, there's some sort of a ledge there where there's just a
Yeah. Yeah. There definitely is. You got me. Okay. Anything else? But Keith, just to circle back, I really like your idea of the record formats for phases, and I'm going to tinker with that.
Yeah. There's also a video on the Vectorworks University, or what the word they use? It was a UK trainer, and I think it was called refurbishing or renovations. It's a workflow, and you can find that course on the Vectorworks University.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
So Francois, when you're showing that side elevation with the new and the existing wall, they're separate components, but you made them look identical. Why mightn't you just consider doing a slightly different shade for the fill on the new wall versus the existing wall, so that it's just identified as such, but it's not a shockingly different thing when you see it?
Yeah, so the short answer is that most of my drawings are pretty, if I go to the CDs, I'll go in black and white mode, right? And if I just flip through the CDs, those, I could have a slightly different stipple pattern for the new stucco versus the existing stucco. But I'm not really sure who that's going to serve, because by the time the stucco guy gets there, or gal, whomever, the stucco contractor, like it's all just one wall to them. Like they don't know the difference. So really the distinction is important for the framer,
Right.
more than anything else.
For understanding the bidding process. to help visualize it. Don't you have a trick where you have a viewport and you overlay another viewport on it, and you can sort of fade in and out various aspects of visualization? I wonder if that would work here. I learned it once from you, and I used it once. So I don't remember now how to do it, but
Yeah, I suppose I could have each element, right? I mean, this is certainly not unheard of, right? To show demolition elevations. Um, you know, it's not, I don't see it in every project, but I've certainly seen that before.
well,
And
if you show the new construction, that implies a demolition.
yeah, but I mean, these little model viewports, the model's there. I could easily have a whole, not just a demolition plan, but, we could have demolition elevations where we call out the heights of openings and where they occur and so on and so forth. That's, for a project of this complexity, that probably would not have been a bad idea. Because, when you do that level of demolition, a plan alone is not sufficient, right? It's not really enough to say, hey, make this 6 feet or 6'4" or whatever, 6'6". It'd be nice to have a height. So that's not that hard to develop from this sort of workflow of having an existing versus new construction layers, and then demo classes, or data visualization and demo record formats.
Well, you have the height because you put in the opening, the demoed opening with a height. You put in the new door with a height. So I mean, whether or not
Right.
you give it a
Yep.
dimension, I wouldn't do that, because you already say per door manufacturer, whatever, and that's
Right. But it's not always, right. I mean, it's not always an opening, right? It could be an architectural feature or whatever. All right.
It's tricky.
Yeah, it's always room for improvement. Well, thanks everybody. I'm going to post this in the next day or two, once everything's been the recording comes back to me. And in the meantime, I appreciate all the great input and from Keith and Bill.